Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss how the Telegraph have genuinely thrown me off guard here. They're publishing articles designed to undermine Labour's tax and spending plans, right? Of course, they are billionaire-owned Tory newspapers, what they do. But in one particular article, they're trying to do so by pointing out how bad the previous Tory government were. But more than that, also how bad the Thatcher Major period of government were as well. I mean, I confess to being a little bit bewildered. But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So, big few days coming as this video goes out. Rishi Sunak will be taking part in his final PMQs, unless something really mad happens in the future of British politics. The new leader is going to be announced this Friday, so it'll be either Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick in future. After that PMQs, we will be getting the long-awaited Labour government's first budget. And that, of course, is where most of the focus is going to be on from today, not least from me. We know the broad shape, we just don't know the specifics, or we are about to. And once we do, there will still be, remember, once the budget's announced, that's just the general tax and spending plans. Then there's a bit of time before we get the actual spending review. Then it'll take a good couple of years before we start to see the actual results from it in the way that people can actually feel. And in that period of time, the Tory client media will attempt to paint the budget as a growth smasher. And assuming that Trump doesn't get to destroy the global economy, then this should all be put to paid, in about 2 years, as I say. So I thought I would just pick up on an article in the Telegraph as a last little look at the pre-budget type of narrative, where they focus on the news that's just come out from the Office for National Statistics that the proportion of people on what are classed as high wages has fallen to a very low level, historically low level. Now, given that Labour are only announcing their first budget today, and most of that will not come into effect until next spring, the general state of our economy right now is entirely down to the legacy of the Tories. So you'd think that the last thing the Tory client media would want to do is remind people just what a state the Tories have made of anything to do with the economy, especially on a week such as this. But that's what they've done. They're pointing out that the proportion of those on what is classed as a high wage, which is £53,500 per annum, if you're taking notes, has fallen to a record low, they say, of 23%. And if you, like the author of the Telegraph piece, by the way, thinks that doesn't sound like a particularly high wage, remember that puts you, well, if there's 23% of people on it, it puts you in the top 23%, right? And this, of course, is a Tory legacy, this data, because the latest data we have, this is all based on the latest data we have, is from like this spring, while the Conservatives were still in power. And even if we had the data right now, remember it always takes about half a year to process it, all Labour have had time to do is boost the pay of public sector workers. Like nothing else, nothing they've done has negatively impacted anyone's wages. They've just positively impacted it. Also, as I say, this latest income data is anyways from this spring. So we've got absolutely no information on anything related to the economy, well, in terms of wages specifically, since Labour have been in government. And of course, because their first budget doesn't come into effect until like next April, we're not going to for some time. So this is what the Tories have done. But it gets better. The second paragraph of their article contains a priceless line. I quote, "The share of high-earning employees in the labour market has fallen to the lowest level since at least 1997, according to the Office for National Statistics." So what they're saying is that the proportion of high earners is currently in the gutter, relatively speaking. I mean, after 14 years of Tory government. And the last time it was at similar levels of gutter crawling was in 1997. What was 1997? That was also at the end of a lengthy period of Conservative government. What they're saying is that Tory governments keep a higher proportion of the workforce in, like, at least middling paid work. They keep them out of high paid work. And yet they're using these facts to somehow suggest that Labour's move to boost the minimum wage and shift the burden of taxes to the better off is a bad thing. But by definition, if the historically low levels of high-paid work coincided with the end of Tory government, then the intervening Labour government must have raised the number of people in well-paid work. In fact, they even point out that the record high was 2012. Now, that would have been 2 years into Cameron's coalition government, but that's at the point at which their own budget decisions will have started to really kick in. So that was an impact from Labour's government. And of course, what they're saying is it was all downhill from there. Oh, fascinating. But all this article really tells me is that we can be confident that workers will be better off under Labour. They're complaining about what they call inflation-busting increases to the minimum wage. I was discussing this yesterday as well. Back in 1997, they complained about the introduction of the minimum wage, when it technically increased by infinity, because we didn't have one before that. It was going to lead to businesses going bust left, right and centre, and that would be really bad for the workers, because who's going to employ them? There'll be no jobs, you fools. Sound familiar? It's because it's exactly what they're saying about the minimum wage increases now. Did the introduction of the minimum wage lead to this collapse of businesses? No, our economy boomed and people's incomes increased in real terms. Both our economy and our workforce benefited. There was no trade-off at the macro level. So we can only assume the same will happen here unless they come up with some evidence to the contrary. There was also a little bit of copium buried in the article. Someone from the High Pay Centre was suggesting, well, maybe this fall has been driven by some employers protecting lower paid staff during the cost of living crisis. And there will be an argument for that, of course. Like, you need your workers to be able to afford the cost of living. So maybe employers were raising the wages at the lower end more in order to be able to keep those staff. And maybe those on the higher wages may not have liked the fact that their incomes were coming down in real terms. But if they could still afford everything, they probably wouldn't go looking for work elsewhere. So that's a possibility. But then you go, no, mate, look at the graph. You know, we're not guessing here. The graph shows us that this decline has been consistent since 2018. It actually makes you wonder why they actually didn't try to put emphasis on the other part of the graph, which shows the massive drop in the number of people classed as being on low incomes while the Tories have been in power. But the reason for that, of course, and it might attract the explanation, that is because if the median income is suppressed, then it's easier for those at the lowest end to look like their wages are better by comparison, even if they're not really. Because remember, we literally had a situation last year where people serving coffee at Costa were being paid more than some qualified and practicing doctors. Remember, that's what we class as high or low wages has got nothing to do with the cost of living. It's based entirely around the median income, where you are in relation to the median income. If your income is at least a third less than the median, it's classed as low pay. If it's at least 50% above the median, it's classed as high pay. And this will be partly why the minimum wage does need to be powered up. Labour plan to drive up incomes in real terms. Well, the higher the overall incomes increase, the higher the median income increases, obviously, which means the higher the minimum wage needs to be in order to avoid dropping down into what would be classed as poverty wages. You don't reduce poverty by allowing the minimum wage to remain in the poverty classification. Now, it could be argued, maybe having definitions that are linked to the cost of living that take that into account would be better than simply comparing it to the median. But then you'd need to raise wages at the low end even more. Because remember, although the minimum wage now we're told is going to go up to £12.21, which the Telegraph have complained about multiple times. This is even more than we thought it was yesterday. It's still below what is considered to be the real living wage. Right? So hopefully it will catch up to that over the next few years. But at the moment, there's still room for it to go up further if you were to base it on the cost of living. So I can't see the Telegraph arguing for this. But if the Telegraph think that fewer people earning high wages is a bad thing, and that is the implication in the thing, oh, this is not very good, is it? Even though it's always coincided with the end of Tory governments, then surely they should welcome anything that boosts pay. Because either strong wages are a good thing or a bad thing. It makes no sense to argue that they're both good and bad in the same article, unless you're going to give a reason why, which they don't. Because what we've got here is the usual trick. They don't care about workers, we know that. They only care about the rich. Now, the rich tend to employ rather than be employed, although there are some very rich people who are employees themselves. But mostly, the very rich employ rather than be employed. So they feign more concern for the employer than the employee, but they don't care about the average employer either, at least most of them. If they did, they would not have supported Brexit, particularly the hard Brexit, or the Tory cuts to investment, especially in the NHS. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the last bit of pre-budget whining from the right wing. I'll try and pick out the highlights and maybe lowlights from the budget itself later today. I'm going to hopefully get that up for 5 p.m, but we'll have to see. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.